Hello everyone, it's Niz. I figured since I have a lot of things in the works in the background right now, and none of them are coming out anytime soon, that I would try to do something for Halloween. I usually don't do something like this because I'm only passionate towards a handful of horror games. Most indie games I enjoy involving horror or even scare me more often have the fear factor as an element, but not necessarily as a strong suit. So I'm working with a pretty small list, and spoilers, the one I'm covering today isn't scary either, nor really a horror game. Deadbolt is something I've found myself passively returning to from time to time over the years. There are a few trial and error killing spree games like this that I adore, and like them, Deadbolt goes great lengths to make itself more distinct. The methodical and precise pacing of the combat with the macabre mood of the story and setting as you go through drug busts to execute creatures of the night does wonders for setting its niche. But I'm honestly surprised the game doesn't have more traction considering it was made by Hopu Games and had Chris Totalu as the composer. In Deadbolt, you play as a Reaper in what can be assumed to be the afterlife, or at least a point between life and death, employed by what seems to be a roaring flame that intends to have the Reaper send the undead to the other side proper. As a Reaper, you're set to deal with the gangs of undead and keep some semblance of order, which proves to be more difficult as you begin to uncover a greater conspiracy that's been cooked up in the chain of command. Before going too deep into the story though, I'd like to talk about the gameplay. Unlike other games that are similar in this sort of genre, the Reaper is weak as well as slow. Your walk speed is nothing impressive, you can't jump, you hold perfectly still when aiming guns, or prepping to throw a melee weapon, and your only form of mobility is teleporting through ventilation shafts and plumbing. But to do this you have to enter a lighter flick animation to form of the smoke, which the animation is short, but also leaves you vulnerable. Okay, slow, lightweight, and arguably clumsy, but what about the Reaper's firepower? You're after all playing the Harbinger of Death. You get a revolver, you get a bunch of other weapons to start out with, and while getting a secondary can be a power spike, it's still nothing impressive considering your secondaries are a bunch of last resort weapons and a weak melee. The new primaries you can get have some powerhouses, but they have notable drawbacks that make them more risky to use. No, the best weapons you can get are the ones you can pick up off of bodies or the ones that are lying around throughout the buildings you raid. So you probably already know where this is going. Despite common belief, the Reaper seems to suck at fighting, or at least relatively to a lot of undead. Good thing it's offset by having vision of every single enemy in the building at any given time. So your advantage as a Reaper is to abuse the element of surprise to its fullest extent. Nearly every exchange is knocking on a door to shoot the guy who responds in the face, attacking a pair out of the blue and running away only to appear around the opposite corner, turning off lights, blowing out lights with your guns, closing doors that a curious guard might have left open. I cannot tell you the amount of times I've waited in a vent for some guards to pass by to investigate a noise I made, and as soon as they head down the stairs, I shoot the last one out in the back of the head. This leads to a gameplay loop that's incredibly satisfying when you begin to memorize the exact course of action you intend to take and what weapons you plan to pick up on the map as you go through in the silent, methodical rampage that most of the residents might not even notice until it's too late. And once they do, they're looking down the wrong doorway. You're solving a puzzle of sorts with how you do this, but the game is open-ended enough for you to take creative liberties. You'll certainly need to practice your aim and have solid reflexes if things go south, but in general, you're expected to have a game plan. Cover doesn't work well against more than 2 opponents, and you can only effectively dodge 1 melee enemy at a time. This might seem like bullying a bunch of opponents who are quite literally brain dead, but these zombies will eat shotgun shells if you don't hit them with every pellet. Besides, the undead are cheating as well in their own way. Zombies have a security system built around the fact that they can take off their own heads, using them for cameras and guards that charge you less vulnerable to the point that depending on where their head is located in the room, you're better off just burning more ammo. Vampires have flag trees that are hidden away and will allow them to resurrect until they're destroyed, and they can even do tricky things like having multiple or having them stored inside another enemy. Skeletons have generals who can resurrect the fallen, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you're picking people off one by one and have very limited ammo, this forces you to change your priority. It might even force you to be aggressive where you otherwise would sit back. So although the enemies have a lot of the same behavior and pathing, they have different abilities, traits, and arsenals that allow them to strategize separately from each other, which again comes full circle to you having to simply outsmart them, which admittedly isn't difficult in isolated cases, but things get complicated quick. Cheap tricks start running out of stock when they start planting landmines where you're supposed to flank them, or they start patrolling all your entryways because you've alerted more than you can kill. You might be playing the sharpest person in the underworld, but don't let it get to your head because plenty of things still go through it. There are a few things that do irk me about the game, although not to a great degree. Sometimes I'm confused about the distance and amount of wall that an enemy can hear a gunshot from. I know some are louder than others, but sometimes it feels like I could shoot someone from across the hall and nobody will notice, but then other times people upstairs will hear a gunshot I did through a closed door. One issue where I do feel was an error in design was that when you drop weapons over doors and vents, it simply makes it difficult to interact with those objects without picking up the weapon. I kind of wish that interacting with an object and picking up a weapon were mapped to separate keys, because being caught out and picking up a hammer instead of slipping away doesn't happen often, but enough for it to linger in my memory as an annoyance. The final complaint I have, and yes, this does seem silly, is the tooltip that comes up when you die enough times. After a certain amount of deaths, the game will sometimes give you a vague piece of advice on how you might be able to improve your run. Advice that you can't seem to turn off, things like recommending you to use cover, or making sure to look at the objective. 9 out of 10 times the objective was kill undead. I'm not dying because I got confused by the objective game, I'm dying because I made a mistake in the midst of killing undead, and I would prefer not to get this constant pop-up of unhelpful advice in a game where you die constantly via trial and error. They ironically annoy me more than the experience of dying repeatedly when they're trying to tell me not to get mad. Speaking of constant death, I think it's worth dipping into the story of this game. You find these tapes throughout stories as drops from killing enemies, which are effective at revealing why each suffers from their specific form of afterlife. The only part I find odd is that they all seem to focus on the cause of death of the person, rather than how they were in life. Zombies died of a drug overdose, and they are now addicted to ash, a drug that's very difficult to obtain, dangerous to make, but makes them also feel alive again, if only briefly. Few of them have the will to avoid it for any length of time, and despite their appearances, they are all still sensitive over loss. Even the high-ranking zombies admit that they take a bump whenever a tragedy occurs. Vampires are in a perpetual state of sex and party. They come to be with their cause of death being betrayed by a lover. Most are completely oblivious to the dangers right in front of them. Seriously, I've had shootouts in front of dancers, then proceed to come back minutes later and execute them in a row and nobody cares. They're not even willing to ask the question of why every bar that they attend opens up and closes in a week or so, only seeking to escape their own traumas, blissfully unaware of the impending demise one way or another. Skeletons are punished for their suicide, as they are forever cold, and the only thing that grants them warmth is being a general, as they very briefly escape from the cold as they bring a skeleton back to life, thus preventing them from escaping their own torment. Demons come across the River of Styx and work as mercenaries, for who you will later find out, but the pay must be good for the risk it incurs to be missing from their boss, even briefly. But what about Reapers? The Flame says that Reapers are not undead, and I'm inclined to believe it, or at least believe that the Flame is speaking honestly here. The Reaper is distinctly different from skeletons despite the appearance. Skeletons breathe cold air and are more durable than Reapers, plus the deliberate difference in the skeleton bleeding this ash blood that leaves behind fragments of bone, while Reaper's blood is inky black and sometimes leaves gore. This, along with his dark black body, the comparably brighter skull, leaves a great potential that the Reaper is not a natural skeleton or potentially one at all. With this information and the assertion that the Reaper isn't undead, I suspect that the Reaper is a construct of some kind, given enough agency and personality to complete these missions of disposing the undead. Potentially a promoted candle that served the Flame in more minor tasks at first, as they seem to be combat capable as well and familiar with stealth, or potentially something else entirely. What makes me sure that the Flame is speaking truthfully about the Reaper not being undead, or the Flame perceiving him as not undead, is that Reapers can become skeletons, which, as established earlier, for deaths to occur, they have to have a life to begin with, and when something undead perishes for keeps, they supposedly pass on to the afterlife. When a Reaper throws their life away and commits suicide, they are shunned from the Flame's blessing and become a traditional skeleton, and our example of this lies in Ibzan. There are some qualities that give away the fact that Ibzan is a former Reaper. The fact that in his room you can find candles, and a crow which perfectly matched the decor of the Flame's manor, and a broken lighter, one of the tools of a Reaper's arsenal, along with him using Revenant, a weapon specifically utilized by Reapers. There's also the fact that he and Reaper are the only ones to bleed the same substance. Ibzan implies that he knows that there are multiple Reapers, indicating he knows more about Reapers than the average undead, and of course, the tapes we can find. The first tape being of Ibzan's monotonous life as a Reaper. We know that this isn't Reaper's cassette because the candles take it from you shortly after, and it matches the way Ibzan refers to the Flame far more than the Reaper does. The second tape is the one you're far more likely to get the the first, the tape where Ibzan had recently become a skeleton. He feels this eternal cold and goes searching for the fireplace in his apartment, and as he desperately tears through it, he realizes the fireplace is no longer in the hole that has been plastered over. Ibzan is a villain hooked on regret. His life was the same dull routine that kept him in a void of time he lost track of, with his only form of companionship being a simple mission briefing, and in a moment of weakness taking his life, he comes to learn how much worse it can get. Now he's in a freezing hellscape, shunned by the one thing that he was attached to. He organized the gangs of undead, plenty of which through manipulation, assassination of hierarchy, and alliances between different categories of undead, to pull the rug from under all of them. He did it all for the sake of making a portal to the Flames' house, and to confront them on what happened, and to apologize. And the most tragic part of it all is that despite doing all this, he never got the opportunity for the Flame to interact with him. It refused. It simply sent the Reaper to dispose of him. The most fascinating part is the Flame's phrasing. He cannot be free. I cannot forgive. A man undead cannot live with me. Part of me wonders if the Flame doesn't give Ibzan warmth because it's incapable of doing so now that he's given up the Reaper life, or if it chooses not to, as it now categorizes Ibzan as an undead. After all, Ibzan still bleeds like a Reaper. He may have the curse of the skeleton, but is it because he's denied the Flame's warmth? The Flame seems to mistreat Ibzan as an outsider looking in, although to be fair, I'm not entirely sure the undead turned to ash actually make it to the afterlife, but he went to these extremes to try to reach some point of understanding, which the Flame seems to deliberately deny him. But despite this shunning of Ibzan, it does seem that a bit of that regret does shed onto the Flame, as you don't find this cassette on Ibzan. You find this in the Flame's manor hidden away, and the candles immediately catch on when you get a hold of it. The Flame does treat the current Reaper with what seems to be more compassion than Ibzan is granted, and Ibzan has a chance of saying that it's warm on his death, which to me says it all, that despite how the Flame treats Ibzan and the talk of there being no forgiveness, and whether it can even do anything to help, the Flame did hear him, and he was granted a form of mercy in the end, although that might be an optimistic interpretation. But anyway, that's why Ibzan's the best Risk of Rain 2 character. Speaking of Risk of Rain, back to Chris. I generally think his best work overall had went to this game. Yes, I am factoring in Risk of Rain 1's coalitions when I say this. The soundtrack does a great job setting a theme of what type of game organization each form of undead is aesthetically, and songs like Now I Am Become Death and Reaper and Blues do a fantastic job of capturing what it's like to come home after a long day's work, while the final boss theme of Ibzan is the perfect symbiosis of somber, regretful, with the hopeless desperation behind it, while he occasionally berates the Reaper and desperately tries to get the Flame to acknowledge him. The game's short and the story's rather simple, but that means it leaves a lot in its implicit nature, which I greatly appreciate. All in all, Deadbolt is a diamond in the rough if I've ever seen one. A game where you go room to room and massacre people, but unlike games similar to it, revels less in reaction time and more in the disorganizing of your opponents, diverting their attention, and finding other tricks to win encounters that are weighed against you. It's definitely worth the $10 if you're looking for a happy medium between Katana Zero and Gunpoint, and don't mind the game's meticulous nature. But that concludes my review on Deadbolt. I hope you all have a good day and be safe.